session with the Consumer Trust and Partner Support team here at Amazon. My name is Damian Jarris. Just to introduce myself, I've been a technical recruiting lead here at Amazon for just about 5 years now. I've had the pleasure of working with a number of organizations and verticals within Amazon. And for this evening, I want to give a little bit of context on the conversation, as well as an outlay of the agenda for the next hour that we'll be discussing Prime Day and what that looks like within Consumer Trust and Partner Support. So, context of this situation or of this session is that we like to, with CTPS, keep an open forum for communication with folks in the engineering community. So we run these events every so often to be able to keep that open line of communication, give people a little bit of a window into our team, what we're working on here within Amazon. And as well, of course, if anybody is interested in exploring potentially joining the team, we're totally open to that conversation as well. And that is, of course, what I'm here to help you with. Now, as an agenda for the rest of the evening, we have a number of great speakers who will be joining us from across Consumer Trust and Partner Support. They'll be discussing a little bit individually around, what Consumer Trust and Partner Support looks like, how we work through Prime Day work through Prime Day, not just during the day of, through these peak hours, but also what we do in preparation for it leading up to peak times like Prime Day, as well how we work out the other side of Prime Day with some of the learnings that we take away and how we implement and, of course, continue to innovate. So we'll have a chance to hear individually from a few folks across the team, and towards the end of this conversation, we'll also open up for, again, that Q&A. Now, everybody who is tuned into this should have received a link to go and provide us with any questions that you have in the background. Now, please, at any point through this, you're welcome to share your questions with us, as you are listening to, everybody come in and share a little bit just about themselves and what they're working on in their teams. You're welcome to come out with certain questions and maybe direct it directly to them, or you can come out with broad questions. Happy to work through that as we get into our Q&A session. So, without further ado, let's kind of start diving in here. Our first speaker for this evening is Matt Bull. He is a senior manager here for the buyer abuse team. Works on account creation, detection, as well as RMP optimization. He's been here for about 4.5 years, so he's been around the block, has a really good understanding of both Amazon as well as the overarching CTPS team. Without further ado, Matt, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hey, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us tonight. Definitely appreciate your time and taking the opportunity to listen and learn more about life at Amazon. And Damian, thanks for the introduction. So as you said, my name is Matthew Bull. I've been at Amazon for about 4.5 years now. In that time, I've actually had a number of different teams. And as Damian had mentioned, when I first joined, I was actually managing the team that identified bots attempting to compromise customer accounts. And as you can imagine, Amazon's a big target. These accounts actually have value in the black market. And so my team its goal was actually to be able to find ways to identify when a bot was trying to do something at scale. And sometimes those are things as simple as running through a list of passwords. Other times it's a lot more complex. And so we worked on developing the solutions to detect and mitigate bots, initially trying to sign in, i.e. test credentials. And then as I spent more time in this space, I actually realized that there was a bigger opportunity actually identifying bots attempting to create accounts, which then could be used for nefarious purposes. So I think one of the things I'm most proud of at my tenure at Amazon is actually launching a solution that allowed us to increase the detection of these bots by 30%. At the same time, reducing the number of false positives by 60%. And in this instance, a false positive to you would be a capture or some other challenge, something that would be perhaps some friction, but to a bot could be a much bigger challenge. So I'm pretty happy with my time on the bot team. As Damien mentioned, after that, I took on some additional scope, and internally we have a tool set called RMP, which is what we use to manage rules. And so you can think of rules as sort of the foundation of machine learning. In the 60s, there wasn't the compute power for machine learning. They were aware of it. And so the most complex things that could be run in that time were actually rules. And so these are basically decision trees. And so I own the service that we use internally. And while I no longer own the service, the service is still active and is an essential piece in the organization. One thing I was very proud to do wasn't a big product thing. It was actually a tech thing. When we were transitioning the language we used to write the rules, and we couldn't actually get parity on the performance. And so I had my team investigate exactly what it would take to fix it. We identified there was actually a race condition with library loading. And once we fixed that, we saw the number, or the time for the rules to execute get in line with the previous language that we were using. While that seems like a small thing, it had a huge impact. We saw some fleets able to reduce the number of hosts by 75%. And that had material impact on some of these larger fleets that were using thousands and thousands of hosts. So I was pretty excited that we could actually bring that tech to the team. My current role, I manage the engineering teams that identify customers attempting to abuse Amazon's policies. And I'll speak a little bit higher level about the org in just a minute. But from my perspective, the easiest way I think about it, when I tell my parents what I do, it's I actually help identify when a customer is likely to do something abusive. An example that I like to think about is we'll see people buy these shiny new AirPods, and then they return the ones they ran over with their car the last week. And so that does seem kind of funny, but it does happen more often than we'd like. So we do have systems in place to help identify customers that are likely to do that. And while obviously that has an impact on Amazon's bottom line, it also has a big impact to our customers. What we do see is there's been multiple instances where customers will buy, say, a Roomba and take out all the internals and replace it with rocks. So hopefully not giving anybody any bad ideas, but you can look for things like Amazon unboxing rocks videos, and you'll get a sense of the type of things that we're trying to stop. Because ultimately, if a nefarious or an abusive customer returns something bad, or in a condition that isn't resellable, and that somehow makes its way to the next customer, that's a really bad customer experience and a trust breaker. So my team focuses on identifying opportunities to reduce abuse. In a more general sense, it's policy abuse. Things like making sure you don't buy all of the inventory we have of PS5s. Like, we have tools in place to help identify that we get one per household, things like that. At a broader sense, and I'll speak to this, and I'll let the rest of the team speak a lot more to the peak prep. I think they've got much more interesting examples than I do. But in the broader org that we all work in, as Damien said, is called Customer Trust and Partner Support. And as the name implies, we're working on protecting the customer trust of Amazon's customers, i.e. the buyers, as well as the partners. And so partners are sellers. And so the parent org focuses on both buyers and sellers. And while the teams are different, we do see similar things across both sides. The signals are a lot different. The behaviors are different. And so within CTPS, we do think about buyers and sellers. I think the majority of the panel tonight is actually on the buyer half, so I'll speak more to that. And within the CTPS org that we're in, we're actually much more focused on buyer risk, the buyer side. And within that, there's a number of teams. As I mentioned earlier, I'm part of the abuse team, the policy abuse team, identifying customers attempting to abuse Amazon's policies. We also have a team that we work with closely called the payments or fraud team, and that's the traditional sort of credit card and gift card fraud. And Raj can speak a little bit more to that today. That's, like I said, much more traditional type of credit card fraud. We see customers attempting to do bad things with other people's credit cards and causing chargebacks. And then a third group that we have in the organization is called an account integrity. And that's the team that I used to work with on the bot detection. So they actually work to identify bad actors attempting to compromise customer accounts. And it's not only the bots like I spoke to, but also humans. It's also farms of humans. It's all kinds of fun things. And so what their goal is to make sure that you are who you say they are. And so they have a number of challenges that we can put in place to verify your identity. In addition to that, there's a team we have internally called Bad Actor Disincentives. And this is a team based out of Phoenix that's actually focused on making sure that we don't pay sellers that are doing bad things. Sort of a weird space. Oh, one second. All right, thank you, Tanya. And then finally, we have two teams that are actually what we call like shared or core. So the first is actually called the correlation team. And that team actually focuses on two things. And one of them is, we do see a lot of bad actors doing things in clusters, maybe using multiple accounts. So that team manages how we detect those relationships. In addition to that, the core team helps us make decisions using machine learning. And so they own the systems that do the model execution, as well as help us pull data to make those decisions. So that's a very central part of the team. We work with them very closely. And finally, we have the team that actually does the engineering to do the model scoring, which is also super important. That allows us to make decisions at order time, checkout time, check-in time, anytime you want. We can make a risk-based decision and hopefully do something that limits the bad customers' abilities to do bad things, but at the same time doesn't impact all of our good customers. So I think that's a pretty high level. I'm definitely open for some more clarifying questions at the end. But for now, for my time, I'll hand it back to Damien to introduce the next speaker.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Matthew. Appreciate the overview on consumer trust and partner support and what this all looks like. Our next speaker coming up is Raj. Raj is, he's a 9-year Amazonian veteran. He has essentially been working as a software development manager with the payment risk engineering team and is essentially building and launching a global product that helps Amazon sellers list once and then be able to sell everywhere. So this is hugely popular. It's had a massive impact globally for us, of course. And so with that, I'm going to bring on Raj to be able to talk about some of the lessons that we capture out of working with peak times.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Damien, and thanks, Matt, for sort of briefing about customer trust and partner support. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as Damien called out, my name is Raj. I've been with Amazon for close to 9 years now, and I started as an engineer. I moved to the development manager role a few years back, and it's been very exciting throughout my journey here at Amazon. I think what I'm touched upon was primarily the role that I was previously doing just before I started working on the buyer side of the world. So I have a good, sort of, when I grew within Amazon, I think I was able to experience different products and different aspects of customer experience and the customer obsession that Amazon has. And my journey started with sellers, of course, right? Like I think that's where I spent like the majority of my 9 years working for, especially like international sellers, where, it's sort of it is a selection problem for Amazon, right? Like we want to, I think the way Amazon looks at things is, if you look at the flywheel, we want to increase our selection so that we're able to offer more product for our customers and then, drive the flywheel from there on. So I think that's where the goal that the ambitious goal that our team had embarked upon was to build a solution that enables sellers to just focus on like one product at a time, right? Just one product, one particular market that they are comfortable in, wherever they are based out of, and then let the system, let the software take care of the rest. In figuring out how do we translate the content, how do we automatically translate the content, right? Like using machine learning models, and then move on to pricing it, right? I think pricing is going to be a big problem because the market in which they would like to sell to, sellers do not have a lot of mechanism, especially like the small and medium sellers, right? Like they do not have sophisticated mechanisms to determine what the right pricing is. Like how can I be successful? I think that's where that's where my team had worked on some of the essential pieces to provide that functionality and to provide a solution based on how competitive they can be with respect to their products. So then I moved on to the buyer risk prevention which is part of CTPS, which is part of customer trust and partner support. And within buyer risk prevention, my team is responsible for the risk evaluation for payment fraud, right? So I think Matt touched upon payment fraud or buyer fraud in his summary, and I think this is exactly one of the most classic use cases that you generally find when it comes to fraud in an online world, right? Like, so where bad actors are trying to get hold of some credit card information from somewhere, some leaked credit card information, and then trying to use it on Amazon to see if they can gain out of that information, right? And I think that is going to provide a negative experience to the actual customer, or who could be an Amazon customer, who could not be an Amazon customer. But in either case, Amazon let something through which is just not the experience that we would like our customers to have, or our future customers to have. And I think this is one of the first use cases that was built. As I think CDPS has had different names in the past, and I think most recent name is CDPS. But I think this is one of the core use cases that we have been supporting. And within this, I guess the most interesting challenge that I've been working on in the recent few months / weeks is, like, how do we reduce our evaluation time, right? I guess one of the key inputs that is needed to make sure the evaluation is as accurate as possible is get as much data as possible on the customer, on the data, on everything that we can get hold of. But at the same time, we're talking about the ship, we're talking about cases where we do not have a lot of time, right? Like, for example, one classic example that I always bring up is, let's say, the physical store, like Amazon Go or Amazon Fresh, like one of these newer physical stores where the customer is either just using their Amazon app and showing that QR code, or just using their palm, or or just walking out, right? Like after they know their purchase. So I think we have very limited time to perform an evaluation to determine the payment method that they used, or they have that is set as default in their app is safe, right? I guess I think we have to make those decisions in sort of like very limited amount of time, and that's been a very interesting challenge. And we have done some phased evaluations. We have done some valuations based on the behavior of the customer. So there's a lot of interesting work that my team is currently working on. And with respect to Prime Day itself, I guess the topic that we are discussing today. So as you know, I think these are some critical systems that are evaluating payment fraud with every transaction that every transaction that goes through Amazon, right? So that naturally means that we have massive scale that these services need to deal with, and there's a definition that Amazon has internally based on the impact that service can create. And of course, like our team owns services that carry the most impact if things do not go well as per plan, right? So I guess one of the areas that I would like to focus on is the preparation itself, right? Like, or what happens during the preparation to a big event like Prime Day. I think it starts with identifying the scaling model for the servers, and that's something that we do and redo every time before a peak event, because we want to make sure, because we keep building new features, we keep trying out new things and adding new code to make sure that, like, we are able to deliver more and more for our customers, right? So I guess that's where the scaling model needs to be evaluated before every peak event, or even for that matter, like on a more regular basis. And we do employ like the classic load testing and stress testing, and on top of it, we have some chaos, or like some sort of like attacks on the servers to see how the service responds. And and more importantly, like, apart from all of the work that we do to test our systems, we also make sure that we have, in case things go wrong even after this, like, okay, what do we do? So how do we make sure that, like, our service is able to mitigate the impact that the customers are seeing, and basically, like, move forward from there, right? Like, while we figure out the root cause, like, what is the best possible customer experience that we can provide at this point? And that's what we call as levers, which could be, some of them could be runtime, some of them could be predefined, where when the system notices that, like, there's something wrong, it automatically applies a lever, and then it sort of like starts starts providing. It may not be the most optimal customer experience that we can provide, but at the same time, it is not going to prevent or it's not going to block the customer from doing what they were planning to do. So, and there are different scores and mechanisms in which how we we sort of like measure this and track it. And so I think that's sort of what goes into the peak preparation at a very high level. And during the actual event is when all of this gets tested, and we take learnings from there, and then we do retrospectives after every event to make sure that whatever was planned was that well executed, right? And right from the forecasting, right from the planning till the final till the end of the event. So, and that goes into the next pre-planning, right? So I think we just got our Prime Day completed in India last week, and we are now starting to work on our Q4's peak, which is our the entire holiday season that's going to come up, and that's the amount of preparation that goes into just to make sure that we are able to basically like our systems work behind the scenes, right? And we don't want to create any customer impact, especially like when it's the high shopping days. So that's a very high level overview of what I do and some of the areas that I have been working on right now, and something related to Prime Day. With that, I'll probably ask Damien to pass the mic to our next speaker.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Raj. Appreciate you taking the time to dive in with us a little bit on what that looks like from the team that you're working on and the impact. Our next speaker coming up is going to be Felipe Cañas. He has been at Amazon for a little over 6 years. He's currently a software development engineer. And in his team, he's working on the payment risk engineering team, specifically within CTPS. And in his role, he has actually worked on a project involving basically complying with data localization regulations in most notably a few different initiatives that cover across CTPS. So Felipe has been essentially having broad impact across the entirety of this very large organization. With that, I want to hand it over to Felipe to discuss a little bit about Amazon culture and as well what we do in preparation for these peak times. Felipe?
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thanks Matt and Raj for your words. So so my name is Felipe Cañas. As you can tell from my accent, English is not my first language. I'm from Chile, from South America. I moved here to Seattle in early 2015 to start my job here in Amazon. And yeah, so 6 years, like Raj, I started on the seller side, but a very different part of seller. I actually started in what's called KYC, which is the process to make sure that sellers are onboarding with real identities. That's to make sure that to comply with regulations. Also, that's been kind of the theme during my time, because there's in different places where Amazon operates, there are regulations that say that Amazon needs to make sure that no money laundering is going on, and we of course don't want anyone using Amazon to launder money. And that process was part of this. So the challenge there was how to provide a good customer experience while at the same time preventing bad actors from getting access. And another challenge is how to do this with very little data, because they were new customers, so we don't have a lot of data on them. I spent a few years there. Then I moved to another side of the seller regulation space, which was suspicious activity monitoring, which in this case was it dealt with sellers that were already active. How could we tell if there were money laundering rings going on in Amazon? So that was a hard problem, and I was in the team that maintained the investigator tools. We have human investigator tools to track cases in order to find out what's going on, to gather all the info, do all that, all they need to do to comply with the regulations and find the bad guys and take whatever appropriate action. Then about a year ago, a little less than a year ago, I moved to where I am now, which is on the buyer side, which is a very different challenge. With sellers, it's comparatively a much lower call volume than with buyers. Obviously, there's a lot more people buying. So it's been an exciting change of pace, dealing with a couple of orders of magnitude more transactions than I used to deal with. And what Damien mentioned about data localization, that's the sort of thing we do. So in my team, we make sure that because we use machine learning. I hope I can share that. If my screen goes dark, it's because I couldn't share it. And we need to make sure that the features are there, right? And they're there in time, and they are there correctly. That's the main thing that my team does. And with these data localizations that different countries are putting into action, they mean that we need to change how we do things so that we can comply with these regulations to keep, to provide our customers with privacy, while also being able to catch the bad guys. Right, we want to catch bad guys because that's how we preserve trust for all the good customers out there. So now I just mentioned customer a couple of times, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about Amazon culture, because a lot of when I'm talking with new hires, a lot of people ask me, they're very focused on the tech, and actually even as a developer, what I like the most about Amazon is not really the tech, it's more the culture. Because I find it's a culture that's it's very healthy. It's very conducive to good results and good relationships between teammates and between different teams. And the main three aspects are, first, as the Amazon vision says, we always strive to be the most customer-centric company in the world. The other one is the leadership principles, which are there. You can go look them up. And the third one is being data-driven. So these three, I think, create a very healthy workspace, because given the customer focus we have, we're always focused on delighting the customers, right? If you're an Amazon customer, we're always thinking about you, how everything we do is going to impact you, how are we going to make your life better. Even if it's a challenge for us, we still always want to do the best thing for our customers. And then we have the leadership principles, which sort of guide us in this ambiguous thing called life. And we have things like earns trust, so that give us the incentive to have good working relationships with one another. We have things like insist on the highest standards, to make sure that everything we do is of good quality. But then we also have a bias for action, so we need to be quick. How do we balance these things? That's always exciting, and it's always it produces good conversation and good discussions with other people in the company. That for me, it's helped me a lot to grow professionally in here. And then the third one, like I said, was data driven. So everything we do needs to be based on data. There are companies out there that have not the best work environments, where data is not what matters. Maybe it matters who says something, right? Here's the data. So it's a lot. We work on solid ground. Every action we take, we base it on data. So we're always following the data to make sure that we are on the right track. And instead of getting into fights, we just focus on where we're getting the data. Let's just follow the data, and that'll take us to a good place. And now that I've talked about data, I'm going to talk a little bit about how my team prepares for peak. So Raj mentioned a little bit about forecasts. We also use those forecasts. But like I said, my team, we deal with making sure that the features for the models are there, they're available at the right latency, so that they can happen in real time, right? So one of the challenges is it's not so much scaling our services, because that's easy, that's completely under our control. It's it's our team charter, so we can get funding for all the hardware we need. The bigger challenge is our downstream dependencies. That is a bigger challenge. We need to start the conversation early, and we run calculations and forecasting to know how much the call volume to our dependencies, to each one of our dependencies individually, is going to change for peak, and we work with them so that they are able to also handle the additional load that's going to come in peak. Now, and there are very different dependencies. Some services are built to handle very large volumes. Others are not, and we need to work with them a little bit more. Sometimes we need to do things ourselves to make sure that our features are still available, even though our call volume to these dependencies cannot grow as much as we would need. And those are interesting technical challenges. How do we get around that? And going back to the beginning, in order to delight our customers, so that we deter the bad guys, and we do not put any friction for the good customers. That's that's the beauty. That's the beauty of the job. So I think I'm going to hand it back to you, Damien. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Felipe. Really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening to talk a little bit about, of course, Amazon across the board and some of the technologies that your team is working on. Now, as mentioned earlier at the very start of this conversation, we're going to get into some question answer forum here. And again, if you, whatever questions you come up with along the way, that pop into mind as we're going through conversation here, please send them in. Happy to fill through as many of these as we can with the time that we've got. I know, we may not be able to get to all of them, but I will try and condense some of the questions together as we move through to try and get everybody, get as many answered as we can. Now, for this session, what I will end up doing is, calling out the question and sharing with one of the speakers in particular, give them a chance to answer the question, and then we'll open it up for additional comments from everybody else. With that being said, Matthew, Felipe, Rush, could I invite you back on screen? Awesome. Always lovely to see faces, especially for the last year and a half. So for the first question that's coming up, this is actually a good one, and it segues, I think, into some good discussion around decision making just in general at Amazon. So the question is very broad. How are decisions made in CTPS? And I think this question probably lends itself to being able to talk about two things: one, data, and two, one-way and two-way door decision making. So with that, Raj, I'm actually going to send this one to you first, and then open up later to Matt and Felipe.
Yeah, I think thanks, Timmy. I think it's a great question, and I'll probably, since it's a bit broad, I'll probably focus on the team aspects of decision making. Right, there's a lot of decisions that are being made at a team level, and it's always interesting because the way Amazon works is that like the team is responsible for that particular product or particular service or particular use case or functionality that it's provided to the customers, right? So I think that that sort of makes the team itself, like all the team members itself, as owners and leaders here. And I think one of the, as you mentioned, the data and evaluating whether it's a one-way door or a two-way door, I think it's always part of our conversations in whatever team meetings that we are in. Let's say if we're figuring out a design approach on how to solve a particular problem. I think that's one of the key questions that get asked. And just to add on to it, I think we also ensure that like the one part of it is to make sure we do the groundwork and get the data and make sure that we put it in a way that's consumable to the audience, right? That not everyone is working on different areas. I think we emphasize a lot on documentation to make sure that it is also pretty written down in terms of what is the context and what's the recommendation from the engineer or the leader who's working on it. And I think the discussion also, I think once the team level discussion happens and we sort of like align on something, I think we also make sure that there's a good way to measure the outcome, right? I think because that's going to be key, and that is going to get applied. And of course, like everyone makes mistakes, and of course, like the team does take some incorrect decisions from time to time. And I think that's where the whole retrospective process comes in, and we just try to kind of keep adapting ourselves. Like one, we do have sprint level retrospectives to make sure that like is there anything that we can do better, and there's project retrospectives that my team employs just to make sure that there is what are the learnings that we acquired working in this product. Like maybe a particular dependency team, like, okay, we learned something new here and we learned their direction, and now that makes some changes to the way we were thinking about the evolution of our product. So I think things like those is sort of like feeds back into the decision making, and that sort of collectively makes way to making even more improved decisions, I would say. With that, I'll probably take inputs from others as well. Matt.
Great. Yeah, I can chime in a bit too. And I think, at its core, Amazon does try to stick by this two pizza team notion. And what that does is it isolates the decisions to the teams that actually can take action. And so the goal of that is actually threefold. As Raj actually mentioned, is this notion of ownership. There's a reason it's a leadership principle. We want you to be able to execute on the goals that you either created or been given. If you can't do it, then if you don't have control over the output, then you're kind of stuck. You have the ownership and the responsibility, but you can't make it happen. So there's this notion of ownership. The second I think about is the autonomy. We're able to make decisions in isolation or at the scope of the team. And the third is this agency. We have the ability to affect change, and that agency is super, super important. And the second thing to consider is we don't always know the right decision. And so in addition to what we have is called a two-way door, i.e. we can go through, and if we made the wrong choice, we can go back. We also have backbone, disagree, and commit. That's another LP. Sometimes we don't know the right thing, and so all we have to do is get agreement that, look, this is good for now. Let's all go down this path together, and let's try it out. And I think there are some other mechanisms that we use. Roz had mentioned the LPs again. We also have this notion of tenets, and these are sort of guiding principles for the team. And when they're properly written, they should help you make a decision. I think one that we use pretty often in BRP and CTPS is with lack of evidence, we will always side with the customer, right? If we don't know that you're doing something bad and we can't prove it, we're not going to punish you. That's really on us to prove. So that's one that almost always appears on the top of every team. And then I think the final thing is, if we can't agree on something and there's no agreement across teams or people, the last thing that we use, and this is something that I think in some companies is looked down upon, but in Amazon, it's part of the culture, it's escalation. We go up a level. We can't come to an agreement. We have our managers hash it out. And those escalations can go all the way to the top. And better to escalate soon than to have than to lose time fighting over it. And so that's one of the ways we shortcut that is escalation. Now, we don't see it all the time, but it is an effective mechanism, and it's something that we do employ.
Yeah, my too bad I went after you, Matt. Your answer was too good. It's gonna make me look bad. But yeah, from my perspective, my limited perspective, I think the combination of data-driven two-way doors and finding the right metrics, I think, and bias fraction, that was the other one, bias fraction. That combination, it's what at least what in my mind I use to make a decision. So what does that mean? Two-way doors, like both Raj and Matt already mentioned, two-way doors are ones that are relatively cheap to go back, right? You go through, doesn't pan out, you go back. Data driven, so you need to know what the metrics are that you're looking for. If there's a decision to be made, it means that we have a certain goal in mind, right? And we need to be able to measure that goal. So we have those measurements in place. And then if it's a two-way door, it means that it's cheap to try. So bias for action, just try it. right? If there's no clear winner, just try it. If it doesn't work, you can try something else. So the only real complication it's the only real complications, sorry, is when you have a one-way door. And that's, at least in my experience, that's when we really leverage more experienced people's judgment, right? Because those are expensive. They've been around. They've seen more things, right? You wouldn't believe what things they've seen. So that's when that becomes useful, and that's when we all align and we move through. And even if it doesn't work, we know that we did it deliberately. It didn't just, we didn't just end the meeting saying, whatever, let's just do this, right? It was a deliberate thing that we all agreed on, because we all understood that it was a difficult choice. But we don't waste time. If it's a two-way door, we don't waste too much with it. We just try it, look at the data. If it doesn't work, change. If it works, just keep going. That's how I explain it.
I know I'm moderating the conversation, but if I could actually add just a little addition onto that, Felipe, one thing I've always found is, when we start to see something as potentially a one-way door, that's where we start to implement dive deep as well. Another one of our leadership principles to make sure that we've got all the data brought to bear to be able to make an effective decision.
Yeah, great point.
So next question that we have coming up, Felipe, I'm going to send this one to you to start us with. What metrics do you use to measure a successful Prime Day at CTPS?
Good question. What we usually monitor. We're always looking. We're like biting our nails, looking at the incoming traffic, right, as it starts to climb, and then we look at our availability metrics, right? Our services? Can we keep this up? So, and that's the main thing. If our error rate doesn't change from regular functioning, that means it's a success. If something fails, and when things fail, unfortunately, they usually fail spectacularly, that means that we were not successful, and we should have prepared better. But that's basically it. We compare regular non-peak time error rates to peak time error rates, and that's at a high level. That's it. Some teams have more specific metrics that they track to make sure that they're not getting close to a tipping point. Things like, I don't know, latency. Is latency creeping up? If it's creeping up, there's probably something going on. It could get worse. But at a high level, it's the error rate. That, I don't know, Raj, if in your peak readiness you monitor something different.
Yeah, I think thanks, Felipe. I guess that's it's one of the primary indicators. I think each service has its key performance indicators. I think each of it is meant to particularly satisfy the functionality or the offering that it provides, and it slightly differs in terms of what it's specifically doing. For example, if it's a queue-based system, I think we're going to be focused primarily on the queue rates and how much are we able to process the incoming traffic. And I guess I think at the end of the day, it all comes back to the availability metric that Felipe was mentioning, and of course latency and other indicators again lead back to the availability. One thing that I would like to add is I think these while some of these indicators we also try to make sure from a customer experience standpoint, and with respect to the actual experience that the customers are seeing during the live event, there's always in our cases there's mostly on the investigator side, and there are of course different ways teams employ to measure how the customer experience is going on, and we just have to have that additional sort of like human intelligence in some of these areas, because there are of course areas where metrics can be will not be able to cover every metric, but there is also some human intelligence that's also working behind the scenes just to make sure that everything is looking good, and they're able to customers are able to do what they expect to do. I think that's what I would say. Matt, anything to add?
Yeah, and I think we do all this prep, right? We tons and tons of prep. We want to make sure things aren't going to fall over, but as everybody knows, things are going to fall over. And so I think the biggest thing, and I think Raj was speaking to this, was this notion of customer impact. Like, maybe my service is dead, but does the customer need to know? If the customer doesn't know, it's a successful Prime Day. It doesn't matter what's happening behind the scenes. If the customer is able to do what they've came to the site to do, then it's successful. We'll figure the rest of it out. And so a lot of the prep actually goes into not only are we going to fall over, but when we fall over, what we do to reduce the customer impact or negate the customer impact altogether. And so that is in terms of mechanisms, turning things off, static homepage versus the dynamic homepage, right? There's a lot of other things that we do behind the scenes to ensure that things aren't going to fall over, or if they do, without impacting the customer. So I think for me, the big output is, was there customer impact? Were customers able to come to the site and do the thing they wanted to do? That's the biggest one for me.
And puppies from 2 years ago.
Yeah,
a lot of puppies.
Puppies are cute. You don't want to see them on the website though.
Awesome. Appreciate it. So next question I'm going to ask, Matt, I'm going to send this to you. So this is a little bit more of a broad question, and it's diving into, our tech stacks. And since you've got a broad view just across the board, I'm going to send this your way. Can you describe the tech stacks that are being used in CTPS for the systems that you're building?
Yeah, and there's nothing secret about Amazon's tech stack. It does have parallels into the things that you're doing right now. When I guess when I joined, I'd been spending a lot of time in configuration management systems, and so it's not just like it's not exactly the same. Like, we're not using Chef or Jenkins, but we're using versions of those. Like, it is the same things. It is the same parallels. The challenge is at Amazon, none of these things scale. And so most of the systems we have are fairly bespoke because of the fact that a lot of the systems don't actually scale. I think the one off-the-shelf system we're using is Git, and that seems to be working for the most part. But we do have a wrapper around the website. So it's all different variants and flavors. We are predominantly a Java shop. That's based on we do hundreds of thousands of these microservices. That being said, yeah, maybe it is millions. It's a lot of people. That being said, we're not like only a Java shop, but when it comes down to it, the dependencies and the libraries that you need to do your job are most likely available in Java. If you really want to do them in another language, you're welcome to, but that may be an investment that your team has to choose to take on. So like I said, predominantly Java. There are parallels to major industry tools that we use internally. In addition to those internal tools, we are, as Amazon is a company, and this isn't a huge secret, we are still migrating a lot of our services to AWS. So we are actually, we do have variants of the AWS services as well for our scale. And so we are in this bit of a weird stage where we're running in two different systems, and we're actively moving to migrate to AWS. So we're shifting away from these pure Java services. We're leveraging a lot more Lambdas when it makes sense. So for us, the technology stack will evolve over time as we shift to AWS. None of us here believe in lift and shift. You have to actually rewrite your software to make it match the platform. And so we will see an evolution of the platform as we shift more heavily into AWS. So most of the teams are going through that in some aspect right now. Most teams actually have services in AWS and sort of the legacy systems as well. So short answer is there's parallels to all the tools you currently use. We're primarily a Java shop. I know, Felipe, you've got a different perspective. What do you think on that question?
No, I agree. I was going to say that teams, and you mentioned autonomy, teams have a lot of autonomy to do whatever they want to do. As long as, every team has its charter, and every team is free to pick whatever makes them more effective and more efficient. So if you want to go back to C for some reason, right? For maybe you went crazy, you want to write some C code. If that helps you meet your goals, then yeah, go ahead. But yeah, mainly we run Java or other languages that run on the JVM. There's some Scala, some Clojure sprinkled around. But yeah, everyone is free. Like, you're free if you want to write your own custom programming language for a specific use case or some domain-specific language. You're free to do so as well. The incentive, of course, given that most of the tools are available in Java. The incentive is, of course, to use the JVM. But if you find there's another platform, another language that's better for you, you can use that. And then the other incentive is moving to AWS, which it's an incentive that is going to get stronger and stronger as time goes on. And so anything that is supported in AWS is also going to be relevant for us, and it's also going to be used as time goes on. That's my view on this.
Anything in addition you want to add, Raj?
No, I think both of them covered it pretty much. I guess the only thing that I'd like to add is there are some parallels to the AWS services. And in fact, I've seen some of our internal services grew into AWS products primarily because I think that's when Amazon realized. Of course, that's how AWS was born. But some of the services that we regularly work with and some of the technologies that we regularly work with, I think they have matured and they've become AWS products. And it's sort of like becoming a cycle. Right. I guess yeah. The other factor is that there is like in terms of technologies, there also I think that's sort of like what Man mentioned. Like some of those doesn't work for the like some of the technologies that's there out there, even the AWS products for that matter. At least when it comes to CTPS or BRP, I think that's when the AWS products also don't work for us yet. And that's where we are building and inventing and optimizing it further and further to make sure that we are able to if you're talking about like less than in very small amount of time frame, it's in like milliseconds or like low milliseconds. I think it's going to be pretty hard to achieve. So some of those sophisticated use cases definitely we employ technologies that are inbuilt, and yeah, I think that's been super successful so far.
Awesome. Yeah. Across the board to echo kind of what you're saying there, Felipe. Amazon's land of 1,000 startups, lots of decisions to get made and a lot of autonomy to do so. So next question that's coming up, Raj, I'm going to send this one to you. Hang on a second, I just had it. Sorry, you'll have to forgive me. There's so many questions that are coming through, and I'm trying to work through and bulk some together where it's kind of applicable and get all of these across as quickly as I can. So how do you handle any mishaps that happen during the Prime Day sale when Prime Day is already live?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good question. It's always it's something that we definitely there's something that we definitely plan for in the sense that like how to handle that situation when it happens, but something that we definitely would not anticipate. So I think it's a very interesting question, and that's where I think Amazon is. It employs a tool called mechanisms, right? I think that's where it becomes sort of a it sort of like solves the problem in a lot of these cases where when you think about how to when we are getting ready for peak and when we are trying to work through our peak readiness, and that's a mechanism that we have where we go through there's a mechanism called I think peak readiness service, which every service, every critical service that goes through and talks about, hey, what am I doing when this situation happens, when these things happen, like what are the things that the on-calls will need to do, and are they documented? I think there's a lot of these best practices that Amazon has built over like 20 plus years of serving critical customer traffic during these peak periods of time, and that's sort of like that's the mechanism that we employ to make sure that like we plan for those situations, and when something bad happens. And that's where those levers come in, and we try to we have some mechanisms where we engage our leaders and or engage all the relevant stakeholders to help help figure out ways if there's any other better way to mitigate the impact and move forward. And I think that's an interesting, and even on Amazon scale, I think there's definitely like organizations or like teams that are responsible for coordinating this sort of like massive massive scale mitigation actions across the board. And I think that's those have been sort of become I would say sort of a boring item these days, because I think we've gotten so big and so mature in how we plan for these events. I think we have not had any big customer impacting event in the recent past, and I think it's a good thing to it's a good thing to be in that state and at Amazon scale. And that's one of the things that keeps us at night just before those stressful days. But they don't turn out to be stressful. So I think that's still a good thing. Anything to add, Matt or Felipe?
I wanted to mention a specific mechanism we have. It's called correction of error. We call it COE. It's something we do every time there's some catastrophic failure. Instead of just, carrying on, moving on with our lives, we put out the fire and then we move on. We take a very close look at what happened. We ask all the difficult questions. What happened? What was the root cause? What did we do to mitigate it? How? And we ask all the hypothetical questions. What could we have done to cut down the time to mitigate by half? What could we have done to have prevented it altogether, etc. So we do all that. We do all the research into what caused it. We gather the evidence, all the metrics, and then what comes out of that is action items, so that ideally the problem never happens again. And even going a bit further, no similar problems happen ever again to anyone in the company. And that process I think that's one of the main things that's hardened everyone's services over time, because out of those services, you get best practices about what to do, what not to do. There's some clever people that even have static code analyzers that run through the entire company's code, and they cut you tickets saying you need to improve this because this is going to break. And that way, the entire company we just have better stuff. It's one of the great things of such a big company. There's a lot of people to work on these hard problems.
Awesome, appreciate it. So I know we're starting to run a little shorter on time, and there's still a lot of questions. A lot of them are quite specific as well, which I appreciate. I think there's one other question that I'm going to pose out to the group here, and then we'll try to answer anything else that comes up over continued future sessions, or opportunities to have conversation with the team in the future. So the question I want to ask is, it comes up around interviewing, specifically, on our technical interviewing. What are some best practices or ways to be able to prepare well for functional interviewing for a software development engineering role? And for that one, Matt, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Look, first off, every company, and Amazon's included, asks you these crazy algorithm questions. We all know that in your day-to-day job, you may not actually do a lot of that. Like, you may understand Big O. You may actually look at your code and realize it can be optimized. But often the types of problems you're solving don't require that. That being said, it's a good measure to see how well you remember your CS fundamentals, and that's really what it's meant for. So if you don't remember algorithms, study them. There's a ton of sites. Leak Code. Start working through those. There's the Cracking the Coding interview. That's actually a great book. It does a great job of explaining it. That being said, don't neglect the behavioral pieces. Like, Amazon expects you to be able to code. And I'm sure anybody here with a degree or some experience can get a refresher in code. The behaviorals are just as important. Either one of those failing will sink an interview. So don't short the time you think about examples, and both positive and negative examples. And there's plenty of questions out there. I don't have to tell you any. And when things went well and when things didn't get well. We're looking for honest responses and to see how you behave and react to questions. Other than that, there's something you can't prepare for. If we say design a system that does this, well, you're going to have seen enough systems to understand the general approach. If we're asked you to do a problem-solving coding question, it may not fit into one of the boxes that you studied for, and that's intentional. We want to see how much you know and how much you can adapt. And just because you maybe didn't nail the code, the interview is also a conversation. Like, we want to see how you react. If you can nail it right off the bat, we know you've seen it before. So we're gonna throw some curveballs. We want to see how you respond. And so, like I said, practice the functional side, but also don't forget about the behavioral side.
Yeah, if I can add to that, there's nothing secret about the asking for fundamentals. What I say about fundamentals is that when everything works well, fundamentals don't matter at all. When something breaks, that's when you need to know the basic principles, because otherwise you're not going to know what's going on. And like Matt said, it's not a perfect process. It's the best tool we have, at least so far. So learn the fundamentals. They do come in handy every now and then. And yes, I agree. I definitely agree with the behavioral being just as important. Part of the interview is just figuring out if you're going to be able to fit in the Amazon culture. As we say, it's a peculiar culture, and we need to make sure that you're going to be able to come in and you're going to be able to enjoy it, as well as to be an effective contributor.
Nothing to add. I think you guys covered it pretty much.
Awesome. I know we're just a minute over, but one I'd love to add in to echo what Matt said. These interviews absolutely are a conversation. I know so many of us have, maybe gotten trained earlier on that interviews are kind of transactional in communication. I ask a question as an interviewer. Maybe there's ambiguity to it. You, as the interviewee, make assumptions based on the ambiguities and where you're coming from, and try to pitch back an answer that you think I want to hear. These are actually not meant to be transactional, just that back and forth. It is conversational. So ask questions, treat your interviewer as a teammate, partner with them, and you can clarify those ambiguities, whether we're talking about, behavioral questions that come up or functional problems that you're working to solve with the interviewer. So definitely partner with them, treat them as a teammate. It's part of earns trust, and ask a lot of good questions. So that's my piece.
Yeah, we're on interviews, we're on your side. We want you to do very well. We want you to excel.
Absolutely. Cool. So, hey, thank you very much for everybody who is able to join us this evening. We really appreciate your time, especially being spent with us on a weeknight, on a school night. And Raj, Felipe, Matthew, really appreciate the three of you for taking some time out of your busy schedules to have these conversations and kind of open up what's going on behind the scenes with something as big and impactful as Prime Day. So with that being said, if anybody is interested in exploring further with our teams, my team will be sending reach outs just as a thank you tomorrow. And we actually have some additional sessions coming up next week where we're going to dive further into just overall, what the interviewing process looks like at Amazon, and how to not just prepare for it, but how to think your way through it. So, we'll open up the conversation and give you opportunity to jump into some of those sessions as well. Thanks very much, everybody, again for joining. Have a great night.
Thank you all.